Why, hello there. I'm Tim. Welcome to Watchbox, and thanks for logging on. As usual, I am coming to you from Watchbox Studios, and we've got a lot to discuss, because this evening we discuss Patek Philippe and all that it is, why it's still the king of the hill, some things that I think could be improved, and I'm sharing your viewer wrist shots right here on Watches Tonight. We are firing up right now. I got my crew here, Andrew and Sean. Thank you so much. They worked technical miracles to make the show happen. You know, we're returning after the off week with the US holiday, and we're starting off with a new way to interact. My Facebook group, Talking Time with Tim Masso, link in the description below, but it's the place where we can interact in ways that were never possible on YouTube. Wrist shots, videos, memes, everything goes, and we've got 1,300 members and growing. We've got CEOs, we've got watchmakers, we got celebrities who are into the watch hobby, but I want you. You are the most important member, and of course, that's where the after party starts when the show is over. Talking Time with Tim Masso. Now let's take a look at some of your wrist shots. The watches you sent to me. Sean B. of Texas shoots his new Breitling Super Ocean Heritage 244 that he recently collected, partially in memory of his father. Samar M. showcases his IWC Spitfire chronograph and BMW X3 M40i. Nice watches and wheels shot, overhead, very cool. Jeffrey S. and his Omega C Master Diver 300 meter enjoy the sunrise over Lake Erie, and that is a wonderful lighting effect you got there, Jeffrey. And Richard C. of South Florida has the hookup with the 2020 edition of the Rolex Sub No Date. All right, someone's an insider. Send your wrist shots to mondaymailbag@thewatchbox.com to see him here on the show. Let's take a look at the box. We got Blue Shirt Buddha, Edward Ledden of Sweden, Richard Combs of South Florida, already part of the show, Mr. No Date, Adam Crossfire. We've got Hans N. Hello, Timothy. Hello, Hans. We got Renside. We've got Logan Hall. We've got Boss Defender joining from Bavaria, Germany, staying up late with us in continental Europe. Turkischer Meister from Turkey. Russell 996 from the UK. Bob Loblaw. We got Patrick S. We've got Ordinary 999 from Norway and Robert Dixon from Scotland. I love you guys. Lloyd Kerr from right down I-95 in Maryland. And then we have Cull Obsidian, who just picked up the new ceramic Kermit, saying you can already feel the difference. Congratulations. You guys who are early adopters of the new Rolex will get featured in this show. I've got a couple of wrist chats coming up. So let me speak about something that is a little, I don't know how to describe it. I'm almost at a loss for words, and that's not like me, but best described as a deep, dark secret. Because while I've historically loved a number of brands that I've described and celebrated and dwelled upon on this show, Jaeger LeCoultre, Zinn, you know I love Moser and de Bethune. The reality is, if I were to put together a collection from a large brand, not a small independent and not a mass manufacturer making hundreds of thousands, but a high horology brand that's mainstream, it would be a Patek Philippe collection. And that was a conclusion I reached partly at the Dubai Watch Week last year, when I saw everything, and I mean everything you could possibly imagine, all in one place. It was the last real watch show before things went crazy, and I acknowledged and admitted to myself that I love Patek, its past, its present, and possibly its future. And this weekend, it was brought back to the fore of my mind as there was a discussion on our Facebook group concerning the present-day Holy Trinity, specifically, do Vacheron Constantin, Audemars Piguet, and Patek Philippe still own equal thirds of watchmaking's highest summit? We had a lot of different opinions, and the discussion continues, but there was one major stipulation: no boutique brands. So even though de Bethune and Moser are probably my favorite two brands overall these days, along with Zinn, I'm keeping it real, the reality is, of the big brands that are out there, with hundreds of retailers, with tens of thousands of watches made, honestly, Patek is the one that I just can't get off my mind, and I'm going to tell you why in tonight's show. First, consider who combines sports watches, dress watches, both at the highest level, grand complications, case, movement, and dial construction, all under one manufacturer. All craft arts in-house, bespoke options across many different models. High horology finish on every model without exception, production volume and pricing discipline in spite of the temptation to make more and charge more, and finally, the integrity of 9 decades under the ownership of one family. Some brands provide many of these traits, And many brands provide some of these traits, but the Stern family-owned Patek Philippe is an unbeatable package of product quality, business integrity, and, as an enterprise, longevity. So, here's a confession from yours truly. If I were to construct my dream mono-brand collection, one brand, any watches you want, no restriction on budget or number of watches, it would be a fight to the finish with Audemars Piguet, mostly not Royal Oaks, by the way, but I think Patek emerges as the choice. First of all, that 5235G regulator absolutely enthralls me. I can't get it out of my mind. And I've considered emptying my bank account over the grand complication 5207P, which frankly was such a bug in my mind, we had to sell the one we had to get it off. And then there's the 5070J that we've got in inventory now, and I'm dying over this watch because I don't love yellow gold, but that watch has made me a believer. All of these feelings I never expected I would have over a big brand that wasn't JLC, and yet that's how I feel about Patek. So before I get too into this, let's acknowledge reality and a few qualifiers in this discussion. There are things I don't necessarily love about Patek, and there are things that they could do a lot better. First, I'm not in the thrall of the Patek Nautilus. This is and frankly, that goes for the Aquanaut as well. The sports watches are nice. I like that they're thin. I love that they're handcrafted inside and out, and I also like that 120 meters is real water resistance. But they're not really the focus of this discussion, and I think the secondary markets for the Nautilus and the Aquanaut are still overheated, because you can get that 5070J that we just saw sealed from factory service for about $5,000 less than you'll pay for a used 5711 in steel right now. In other words, just flat out not my thing. Okay, second, there's a bunch of stuff that Patek really could do better. First, there's the 2-year warranty. In an era where Rolex, Omega, and Breitling can give you 5 years, and Jaeger-LeCoultre, which is a Richemont brand, can give you 8, Patek's 2-year coverage feels like a relic of the 2000s, back when 24 months was the standard, and we'd just gone from 12 months being the 90s standard to 24 being the 2000 standard. Well, now the word is out. Synthetic lubricants in watches mean, especially with better manufacturing tolerances, that you can easily go 5 years between services. So I do believe Patek could do better than a 2-year warranty. That said, they make nice stuff. Then there's also the no-hack movements. There are a lot of heritage movements in the Patek catalog. The 215 manual wind, the micro rotor automatic 240, the center rotor caliber 324, the tourbillon, and then the chronograph caliber 28520. And none of these have hacking seconds, which is a refinement you'll find even on a basic grade ETA 2824 and its Solita counterpart. So I do think that it's about time to start retiring these movements. Fortunately, that does seem to be the case, and they're slowly getting pushed out. But still, there's so many of them offered and no one's getting a discount, so I do think that's a demerit for the moment. Finally, I'm not sure why Patek Philippe switched its bracelets from screw-fixed links, for years, decades even, to pin sleeve fixed links. But it seems like an error in a world where some Oris bracelets and all Rolex bracelets are held in place by screws. If you want to size your bracelet with a screwdriver, and frankly that should be possible on every luxury watch bracelet, it needs to be screws. It can't be pins and sleeves. That reminds me of an Omega bracelet from the 90s. Patek could definitely do better, but again, I'm splitting hairs because I love so much about what Patek is and does. All of this can be forgiven. Let's take a look at what you guys are talking about. Blue Shirt Buddha, bingo Tim. I must have struck a nerve there because I'm talking about gripes, and I think I probably found one that you agree with. We've got Karate Chop saying a simple Calatrava goes a long way. Turkisher Meister saying 5196P is so mighty and elegant, and it is. And it's also a reference to vintage Calatravas, which I like. Patek always acknowledges its history. Mr. No Date saying a 5164A Aquanaut travel time and a 3970P Perpetual calendar chrono might be the perfect two-watch collection. And Andrew Eastlands wants to know my thoughts on the 40mm blue dial stainless steel 6007A made in 1,000 pieces for 2020. I like it. I like it because it's got a quasi 6006 dial, and I've always been a fan of that watch. The 6000 before it and the 5000 before it. So I'm a fan, but I do think because that is a steel watch and this is its first year on the market, wait a couple of years to see if the interest is sustained. Sometimes A special edition watch will become a legend and it will appreciate. Sometimes a special edition watch will be just that, an episodic issue that, well, frankly, a lot of folks move on from. And maybe that'll be the 6007. Right now, I'm pretty sure all the new examples have been sold, so I would say wait a couple of months to see which way markets go on that model, because I can think of a lot of previous Patek special editions that aren't necessarily well thought of and sought. Okay. Now, right here, Mark S. saying Nautilus until I die. Sounds like he is a fan. And then we've got Soma R. saying 5172G is the most beautiful Patek chrono. Change my mind. I don't think I'm going to change your mind, although I will say the 5370P might challenge your assumptions. Okay, now, let's talk about Eric Nielsen, who's saying, yes, Patek will tell you why hacking and screws are bad. Go ahead and drink the Kool-Aid. No Kool-Aid here. We're realists, but I'm also weighing the plus and the minus, the advantages and the disadvantages. And overall, I think I like Patek. And we'll talk more about why after Kyle A. and his wrist shots. Number 2, our second flight wrist shots. We've got Kyle A. and Hannibal the dog sharing a frame with a Breitling Aerospace Evo, which truly is the best sports watch you can buy for sheer functionality. Abdul R. and his Tudor Black Bay Red enjoy a final summer day on the Med in Egypt. I hate the end of summer, but you're definitely spending it in the right place, Abdul. Jared L. swims with one of the world's best sports watches, the H. Moser & C Pioneer Center Second Cosmic Green. You can't quite see the cosmic green fade on that dial. Trust me, it's there and it's awesome. We've got Robert M., who shares my love for Frankfurters that tell time with his Frankfurt-built Zin 104 date. Very cool stuff, guys. Send your wrist shots to mondaymailbag@thewatchbox.com to see your analog on my digital. Okay, mainstream excellence. There are a lot of companies that build beautiful things. It's hard to beat Philippe Dufour, but he's only going to build half a dozen watches a year at most. It's tough to beat Romain Gaultier and Grubel Forsey, but Grubel Forsey makes 100 watches a year and they have 100 employees to do so. They can polish to their heart's content. In order for Patek Philippe to finish everything like Grubel Forsey, Patek Philippe would have to be the size of General Motors, and yet they still come close. And that's the miracle, because across the board, everything Patek makes, basic finish, it's excellent. Let's just talk about those screws. Now that's the 5101P, but the screws you get in a standard caliber 215 are finished the same standard. They're black polished on their top. Their slots and circumference are chamfered. If you withdraw them from their threadings, the screws on both the 5101P and a basic 215 manual wind, the bottom of the stalk of the screw will be mirror polished. It's called the pilot, and it's part of the finishing standard for screws at Patek. The same people make the same screws, and that's my point. There's no compromise with the basic watch. You might not get as much complication, you might not get the same level of exclusivity, but you will get a certain baseline level of quality, and very few brands do this. The quality of the Côte de Genève, the engine turning, the black polishing, and the screws on the entry-level watches is not appreciably distinct from the high complications. Let's talk about the other brands in the Holy Trinity. At Vacheron, I have to admit, if you get something like a 56 self-winding, the standard of finish is not going to be as high as on a Patek. I'll also mention that if you get an AP Royal Oak 15500, or if you get a Code 1159 chronograph, you're going to look at that watch, you're going to loop the bridges, and you're going to see that there's a sharp machined bevel on the edge of those bridges. That's not what you get when you buy an APRP Renoir Papi Audemars Piguet watch. You're going to get a higher standard of finish. If you buy a 15202 and you look at the beveled edges of the bridge, it's a very different standard from a mass-produced Royal Oak. And the fact that there is that distinction sets Patek Philippe apart from Audemars Piguet. There is no lower level or second-class citizen finishing at Patek Philippe. Again, you might not get the exclusivity, you might not get the complication. You okay, Andrew? Okay. I got my crew, got to watch out for him. If you need to get water, it's okay. It's totally cool, man. Okay. But like I was saying, at Audemars Piguet, there are different levels of finishing for different levels of price. And I think if you buy a $50,000 gold chronograph from the Code 1159 line, you deserve the same level of finish as someone who's buying a $100,000 complication. But again, that's what sets Patek apart. Not all brands are like Patek in that regard. Now, movement architecture. Let's talk about the difference between finish and architecture. So Sean, if we can go full screen right here, that is the back of the Millennial Limited Edition 5100, the Manta Ray or the Neo Manta Ray. You could see that it's beautifully finished, but also look at the layout of the bridges. Look at the finger train at the end of the drivetrain leading down to the escape wheel. See how it has individual finger bridges? Do you see how they're curved? This is indicative of higher level watchmaking. It's not just nicely beveled. The Côte de Genève are nice, but they're not what set it apart. It's the fact that before the finishing, someone thought about making that movement look beautiful. And that is deeply impressive because most brands, Vacheron in particular, are happy to throw together movements like the 2450 or the 1400 or the 4400, let the wheels fall where they may, and then try to finish it to make it look upscale. And they succeed. But having architecture and finish, a movement that's inherently beautiful and then elaborated at the craft level, that really sets Patek Philippe apart on many of its models. Let's talk about the 5235. Patek started with the idea of its micro rotor. We can go full screen here too. And instead of using the standard 240 and attaching a regulator module and an annual calendar, Patek created an all-new movement to fill the case back of the 40.5mm watch. Now you can see that the bridges have been designed in a lovely crescent arc on one side, opposing the rotor and the balance. You can see echoes of that pocket watch style terminal end finger train for the end of the drivetrain leading up to the escape wheel. And you can see that everything has been placed to give balance, proportion, and properly fit that case back. This is not a movement fit to a case. This is a movement designed for the case and a movement designed to look beautiful. You can continue with the 5101P. Let's bring it back. Take a look at that movement. Not only does it reference Patek Philippe's own chronometry competition tourbillon watches from the 20th century, but you can see that the tourbillon gets pride of place. There's a mono bridge for the drivetrain and the barrels, as there would have been in the pocket watch day, and then the tourbillon is gloriously open with a minimalist black polished and continuously rounded specular finished bridge over a wire-like tourbillon carriage. This is not just a beautifully finished movement. It is designed like a piece of architecture for your wrist. And of course, the 29535 PS. Let's take a look at a split-second version of Patek Philippe's famous chronograph caliber. Now this is all in-house. It is double column wheel. It is manual wind and lateral clutch. But Patek Philippe considers lateral clutch to be premium compared to vertical clutch because you can see everything, it's tougher to tune, and you get the benefit of enjoying more finely finished pieces unobscured by a winding rotor. So you can see this is not just a movement that's been finished artfully. This is a movement that was designed to be seen first and foremost, to lay everything bare right down to the minutest return spring of the retropont system. And finally, the R27T, a minute repeater with a tourbillon built in. Do you see that wheel at the center, the third wheel? It's comprised of 14 karat gold, and those spokes, which emulate the almost biomorphic form of an octopus arm, those spokes are not standard. That could have been a standard wheel with straight spokes, satin finished top, and beveled inner circumference. Instead, Patek Philippe spends 10 hours finishing just that wheel. And that's before we get to the rest of the movement, with 9 interior angles and a black polished batwing style bridge for the tourbillon. This is a gorgeous movement before it even gets into the watch, and it's not just beautiful because of the finish, it's beautiful because of the design. So that's what I think about Patek Philippe movements, and I would also go so far as to say Patek doesn't compromise by trying to drive volume with cheaper models. Vacheron, 2 years ago, stirred controversy with the 56 lines. Now, it's true, many of them do feature in-house calibers and Geneva hallmark, but the self-winding, the volume model, was designed with a Valfleurier movement from Richemont's movement company, Valfleurier. It is shared with Cartier watches. It is not high horology, and that stands out. Also, an entry-level Patek Philippe does not feel compromised. You take a look at the 5227, and that is gorgeous. First of all, there's a hidden hinge for the Hunter caseback. The fact that an entry-level watch has a Hunter caseback at all should let you know what this company's values look like. and what they feel like. Shut the case, it's seamless. Even the hinge disappears, and you're getting both a display case back and a solid gold case back at the same time. Nothing about this feels like a volume driver. Also, remember, AP calibers, such as the 3120, such as the 4401 and 4402, such as the 4302, all these modern AP calibers that you'll see in the automatic Royal Oaks and the Code 1159s, they are designed to a price, and most of their finishing is mechanical. It doesn't matter that you're going to spend potentially over $50,000 to put one on your wrist. You're getting largely the same level of finish that you'll find in a Jaeger-LeCoultre or even an IWC in some cases. You don't get that at Patek Philippe. Now, as I wrote, Patek has integrity, and I'll talk about where I wrote and where you can read it, but Patek has integrity. It held the line on the pricing of its Nautilus last year, and let's recall, last year the Nautilus did stupid things on the market. A $30,000 watch became a $70,000 watch overnight. I didn't necessarily agree with this, even as I admit it helps to pay the bills. But Patek Philippe wasn't part of the madness, as they held the line at around $30,000 with the Nautilus. And when they could have easily simply said, look, we're going to give you an extended warranty, charge the same $70,000, but you're going to get it from the manufacturer, they could easily have done that. But they didn't. And last year, Patek upgraded the Nautilus in the biggest fashion we've seen since 2006, as almost without fanfare or announcement, they added the new 26330 automatic caliber, which does, finally, have hacking. So Patek was largely free of the feeding frenzy that broke out last year, and they were not culpable for it, because I'm also pretty sure that they did their best to satisfy the demand with a little bit more volume. So at the end of the day, don't blame Patek for the craze over the Nautilus. That's something you and I created. Now, as I wrote last year for Quill and Pad, Patek itself was a rare oasis of restraint and fairness in a Nautilus market otherwise gone nuts back in 19. And if you want to read that, you can easily find it on Quill and Pad, where I periodically write articles. Now, willingness to experiment, and not just as of 2020, that right there is the Peripheral Rotor caliber 350. That came out in 1975, when the idea of a Peripheral Rotor automatic designed to create an ultra-thin watch, that was downright diabolical to engineer and crazy to attempt. This is a mechanism that Patek Philippe continued to improve for 15 years, and while it never worked exactly as intended right through the 350i improved model, the fact that they showed this kind of ambition instead of just sticking with the JLC automatic that they were sticking in their watches in the 70s, that shows the level of integrity Patek has, because A, they already had a movement that worked, and B, this was in the era of the solid case back, when no one really knew what was inside the watch. Now, all of the following, and I'm going to mention a few times Patek courted controversy, they invited backlash, economic jeopardy, or both. Let's, in the spirit of that caliber 350, ask who else launched a perpetual calendar chronograph during World War II? There's one company that did that. Do you want a luxury watch with handwritten dial font? That was a risk last year with the 50... We got some motorcycles outside today in the area. But with the 5212 last year, Patek went with a handwritten fashion to the font, sampling an employee's handwriting in the manufacture. How about a 1990s high horology luxury watch with a rubber strap? Guys, that's the Aquanaut 5060A, and you're going to see it in a moment. Or an ultra-luxury Aquanaut that did what a lot of Patek collectors didn't want to see, and opened up the dial to show the mechanism, using elastic applications of alloys in place of multiple moving parts. And that was, of course, the anniversary 2017 Aquanaut Travel Time Advanced Research, the 5650. Let's ask, what about something so outrageous that they knew before it even hit the market it was going to be a love-hate watch? That is the Patek Philippe sculpture, also known as the Russian watch. They understood this would be a polarizing piece. Instead of going for the easy crowd pleaser, they went for a watch that even in Russia remains a controversial piece to this day. Or how about doing the same in the modern era, when instead of chaste elegance for 2016, Patek Philippe went with oversized diamond index dial limited editions with a cobalt blue metallic dial you could not miss. Was it bombastic? Yes. Was it a little bit Hublot? Yeah, definitely. But at the end of the day, Patek Philippe could have simply made another platinum Nautilus, just like the last 5711 1P, and sold every one they made. Instead, they did something different. Did they take a risk? Did they court controversy? Yes, they did. But at the end of the day, they had the courage to do it. And whereas the Code 1159 hasn't really worked out for AP, at least not as they hoped, back in 2016, Patek Philippe proved you could put on a good freak show. Now let's take a look at the chat and see what you guys are saying. Kevin S., I understand it, man. I feel you. But you know what? I'm sorry. We got a crew in here. I'm not the healthiest guy on earth. We got to deal with it for now. And then right here we have Marco Bernardi asking, why does no one discuss the Neptune? And I'm so glad you mentioned that, Marco. I love the Neptune. Do you want a steel full bracelet salmon dial Patek Philippe sports watch with a tritium patina, a real one? Then you want to consider the Neptune. Look it up. It's not quite as, shall we say, fabulous as the sculpture, but it's definitely a watch whose time is coming. So if you want to get in on Geneva Hallmark Excellence, stainless steel, integrated bracelet, sports, salmon dial, tritium patina Patek, and you haven't put the Neptune on your list, you definitely need to do that. It's not as outrageous as the sculpture, and a lot of folks are already on board. They are beginning to appreciate. I can also see right here, Horatio is saying, like Patek, Lange's incredible finish is uncompromised on entry-level models. For the most part, at the beginning of the 1815 series, there were compromises, bridges that were not finished on their underside, things like that, costs cut, wheels that weren't visible, not finished. I'm not saying Lange still does this, but there was a time when that was done, and that's the kind of compromise that Patek has never made. But I do think in general, Lange is a good comparison, but remember, Patek is making 40 to 60,000 watches a year, Lange is making about 5,000, and in terms of managing the equity of the brand, Patek Philippe watches benefit from the production discipline of Patek and the pricing discipline of Patek, two things that Lange has not historically had. Little things set Patek apart sometimes, even from truly great rivals. And then we've also got Ordinary 999. Tim, do you like the 3940? Yes. Yes, I do. I like that lovely mid-80s to mid-2000s Perpetual calendar micro rotor. The size is nice, the early models are highly collectible, and they made so many of them that you don't have to compromise on condition or metal. You will find the one you like with full box papers, hopefully original sales invoices, because again, when they made roughly 7,000 of them over parts of 3 decades, there are enough out there that you don't have to get one that's whittled down, over-polished, and incomplete as a set. So I do like the 3940, and if you like more traditionally sized dress complications, you're really gonna like that one. Now let's take a look at some of your wrist shots. Chris L. hits the road with his Girard Perregaux Laureato and BMW M240i. Nice shot, really well captured. Ahmad A. flaunts the Cadillac of dive watches, and one of my favorites, with the 50 Fathoms flyback chronograph. Really nice look, and the great outdoors, well framed. Jimmy Y. and his Pepsi GMT share the glory with the Women's AIG British Open Trophy. You're going to have to tell me the story behind this photo. And then Dave C. and his Luminor Submersible PAM 1305 hit the beach late in the season with, as he tells me, a $10 NATO strap. Remember, send your wrist shots to mondaymailbag@thewatchbox.com to see your pieces on these pixels. Now, modern day classics and community support. Let's talk about making watches that people want in the modern era. Watches that people acknowledge will continue to be desirable beyond our time, and the way the factory engages with its collectors. This is important. Let me be frank about something. In all of the years I sung the praises of Jaeger-LeCoultre, online and offline, never once did anyone from JLC reach out to me and say, hey, I like what you're doing, or we acknowledge you exist. Not once did I get invited to a special event. Not once did anyone drop me a note, drop me a line, suggest I come to a boutique party. And this was years and years when Govberg was a JLC retailer. So there was even an official connection. And again, I never heard from them. Doesn't mean I think any less of the watches, but I know that that's not how Patek Philippe is, and that makes a difference to me. But first, let's talk about enduring quality in models and enduring appeal. We often speak of vintage classics from the 1930s through 1970s, which many consider to be the golden era of Swiss wristwatches. But which brand has coined more latter-day legends than Patek? By this, I mean watches already esteemed like vintage immortals despite launches in the 1990s or 2000s. Let's take a look at some of them. We spoke of the 3940 just a moment ago, but there's the 5004 of 1996. Just about everyone loves its combination of complication and chaste dimensions. There's the 5060A, a steel sports watch on a rubber strap from 1997, very limited in production and very collectible. There is the 5070, which of course we discussed a little bit earlier. That came in 1998, but so did the 3710, the first complicated Nautilus, and a jumbo power reserve that everyone wishes he had bought back in the day, and sometimes back in the day was only 5 or 6 years ago. There's the Manta 5100, several different metals, all 3 golds and platinum, beautifully designed and a tribute to the vintage 2554, I believe. That came out in 2000. That watch is renowned, not just a 10-day power reserve, beautifully finished and with tremendous movement architecture, but Patek putting its money where its mouth was, a COSC certified chronometer. How often do you see that in the high horology realm? Very rarely. Let's talk about the 5970 that came out in 2004. This is a watch that everyone and his brother wish he owned. Why? Because it's perfect, the end of the Lamagna calibers, and yet contemporary enough that it feels like a modern watch with the fit, finish, and materials that entails. There was also the 1-year 3712, another watch we all wish we bought 15 years ago. Patek is very good at coining classics. What I'm saying is you don't have to go back to the vintage manual-lined perpetual calendar chronographs of the Valjoux era. You don't have to go back and pick up a 12600 AT powered automatic enamel dial from the 1950s, or one of the amagnetic models, or something with a Louis Cotier movement. You don't have to do any of that. Patek has built watches that will be legendary in the future, that are already legendary now because they were classics from the moment they left the manufacturer in the 90s, the 2000s, and the 2010s. I can't think of too many brands that have that many modern day classics. Look at Audemars Piguet and how it struggled to get away from the Royal Oaks. Patek has its Royal Oak in the Nautilus and its junior Royal Oak in the Aquanaut. Patek does not struggle to expand beyond a hot sports watch line. Patek has never been reduced to the Nautilus company, even as AP at times has been reduced to the Royal Oak company. Let's talk about Patek's support for the vintage scene. They offer archival resources to collectors and auction engagement, and not just in the sense at Breguet that you want to buy up the old pieces to inflate the brand, also because they genuinely want to own them. And that takes us to the auction trophies on display at the Patek Philippe Museum. Patek has a full-time watchmaking staff at the museum to ensure that everything runs. Even if it dates back to the 1500s, Patek wants to make sure if it's in the collection, it's going to run. Which means not only do they have watchmakers there full-time, they have restoration specialists. And the kind of guy who can fix a Renaissance-era calendar complication, that kind of guy could easily be the man and the brand with his name on the dial somewhere else in Geneva. The kind of watchmaker who would start his own brand at the highest level with the imprimatur of Patek Philippe on his resume. That guy is working at the Patek Museum restoring stuff that does not have his name on the dial. And that's the caliber of watchmaker Patek has just at the museum. And think of this. It gets better because a huge proportion of the collection in the Patek Museum is not Patek Philippe watches. If you look at the Swatch Group in Breguet, they wanted to raise awareness of the Breguet brand after they bought it in 2000. So they went out and started bidding crazy amounts of money for every Breguet pocket watch ever made during the times of Abraham Louis or his sons. The problem there, it was an obvious publicity stunt. Swatch had no real interest in the watches, and beyond the Breguet brand, even though they had the budget, they didn't have the interest. At Patek Philippe, they go out and they buy significant watches that have nothing to do with the Patek brand. Watches that date back to the golden era of watchmaking in Britain or in Paris. And I have to say that Patek has non-Patek antique horology that documents the history of time, science, and engineering predating the Patek brand in 1839. There are great French, British, and Swiss masters inside the Patek Museum, and they tell that story too. That's Thomas Mudge. Go to the Patek Museum, you'll learn all about him. I would also say this is the kind of thing that is unique to Patek. Interest in showcasing the history of time, period, not just Patek Philippe. Let's talk about community events. Just like JLC never reached out to me, Patek is almost too active in reaching out to its community. Every year around the globe, it's going to have events at dealers, at hotels, at restaurants, and every 2 years, it's going to have a major regional grand exhibition. In 2017, I went to the exhibition in New York City. And of course, in 2019, we had the exhibition in Singapore. But here's the thing, it's a fully committed effort. They spend tens of millions of dollars on this project. They bring roughly 1/4 of the vintage collection from the Patek Philippe Museum with them. And they bring in their artisans, people with faces and names, to give credit and to let the public watch as they work. So you get to see the craft artisans in marquetry, enameling, engraving, miniature painting, gem setting, all of that, guilloche, in real time. This is not something that the Richemont brands will do for you. And here's the thing, when I saw the exhibition in New York, I was part of the show. I wanted to know how Patek would treat people just walking off the street from New York. So I stood by the entrance and I saw kids, people in tank tops and shorts, tourists and local city municipal workers greeted with the same courtesy as blue chip collectors, people who were part of the exhibition, and hedge fund magnates. And I know because I met a few of them there. Patek Philippe was wonderful with everyone who came through that door. There was no dress code, and there was absolutely no prejudice about how people were treated, how they were led through the exhibitions, and how they were explained at each station. Patek also holds many of those smaller events where they really do reach out, and I have to say all the people I've met from Patek have been super friendly. I love the collectors. I love the people from the brand. Here in the US, I found that the people at Henri Stern genuinely love watches. And if you say, of course, people who work at a watch company are going to love watches. Nope, that's not universal. There's more passion in the chat box right now than there can be found at many major group brands. You won't have that problem with Patek Philippe. I see Matthew Gerlitz saying Grand Chime. Oh, we'll talk about the Grandmaster Chime. It's in the program. And then let's talk a little bit about high complications and craft arts. Because I mentioned you can watch these people working at the exhibition. They're full-time in Geneva. Consider the Harry Winston Opus series with grand complications and craft arts, a collection of ultra haut-de-gamme watches. One arrives every couple of years. It's spectacular, but you'll wait about half a decade in between editions. It's like that every single day in Plan-les-Ouates at the Patek Philippe manufacturer. You can have a 6002 Sky Moon tourbillon with a reverse dial to show off some of its 13 complications on each side. It's engraving, freehand with a burin, a chisel, and a hammer. Puts it in a different category. By the way, it also has enamel, but this puts it in a different category than merely complicated watches. This enameled and engraved 13 complication double-sided opus, and I use the word traditionally there, is a statement of universal mastery by Patek Philippe, the manufacturer. Or perhaps you prefer something more discreet like the 5178G, a watch with an eggnog enamel dial, and yes, I'm coining that phrase, that is not Patek's name for the color, but it is eggnog. It's a Breguet numeral eggnog Grand faux enamel dial on a 40mm watch that's 10.5 millimeters thick. It is all about cathedral gongs. It sounds incredible. And cloisonne enamel at Patek Philippe is a given, and they do some of the best and most recognizable in the world. Patek also goes toe-to-toe with the upstarts in independent horology and Audemars Piguet, which is known for its extravagant complication and craft pieces, because Patek offers the Grubel, Richard Mille, AP, and opus-busting raw power with 20 complications in the 6300G Grandmaster Chime. This is the production version of the watch that arrived as the 5975J for the 2014 175th anniversary. So this is the white gold production version of that watch. Note the rotating case, which is entirely handcrafted, the 2 dials, the 20 complications, a movement, everyday reliable, with 1,366 parts, all of them handcrafted. This is as good as it gets, but Patek also impresses with simplicity. Consider the chaste handcrafted minimalism of the engraved and enameled Calatrava 5088 100P. That dial is enameled in black and it is hand engraved. And yes, the flanks of the case are also engraved and enameled. All of this is wonderful, but how about Patek Philippe's Marquetry? What a difference maker. A lot of companies today do guilloche, gem setting, enameling, miniature painting, all of that in-house. But marquetry, most people can't draw what you're looking at right there. At Patek Philippe, they cut the wood. They select the wood by density, color, and grain. Then they assemble the pieces to create a jigsaw-like picture that is completely flush to the dial. That is impressive, and that is not generic. Most brands have nothing like that. How about people? Look at the folks who've passed through the door or collaborated with Patek over the years. Designers, you want them, you got them. Gerald Genta, Gilbert Albert. How about case maker elite Jean-Pierre Hagman, especially with the repeating complications and the chiming complications? How about watchmakers like Recep Recepi, who apprenticed at Patek Philippe, or masters who worked for the company like Roger Dubuis or Laurent Ferrier? How about enamelers like Anita Porcher and Susan Rohr? The list goes on and on and on, and it is literally the Hall of Fame of Swiss high horology. And all these people and more have connections to Patek. Let's take a look at your watches. Enough about Patek. What's on your wrist? Khalid A, his Omega SMP Diver 300 meter on Her Majesty's Secret Service, and his McLaren 675 LT Spider are en route to the Dubai Autodrome for a track day. Very cool. Phil P and his Rolex Oyster Perpetual 34 celebrate Rolex's original sports watch, the legacy of the Oyster water-resistant case and the Perpetual self-winding system from 1933, the year they went together and became the Oyster Perpetual, in early editions known as the Bubbleback. Brad S of North Carolina shares a moment with his dog and Rolex Daytona Steel. A good shot of the watch, less so with the dog, but he doesn't seem too interested. And then Robin W brings us another 2020 Submariner sighting courtesy of his Kermit 2 ceramic bezel. Looking good. Guys, join me on Facebook after the show. I want to know what you think is that holy trinity of today. Does it include Patek Philippe? Tell me. That thread is still raging right now. I want to thank everyone in the box. This has been a long-winded and involved explication and exposition. Thank you for your patience and for your passion. I always read all of your comments in the box after the show. Remember, join me on Facebook, Talking Time with Tim Masso. Check me out on Instagram, Tim_Masso, and reach out, tmasso@thewatchbox.com if you want to buy anything you see on my channel or on our website. Guys, thank you so much. Thanks to my crew, especially Andrew, who's a real trooper. Need some water, Andrew? You good? You good? Okay. Thanks, guys. Time out, Tim out, and thanks for logging on.